So today let's talk about musical building blocks, MIDI building blocks, and that could be in the form of an ostinato, a riff, a pattern, a musical motif, a string run, arpeggios, anything that has a pattern that could be thought of as a musical building block in the MIDI form. And we've heard them all over the place. There's millions of them out there, but each one can give you a musical idea and maybe can take you from not being able to think of something to an idea might just be sparked in your mind, and that will add some movement to whatever you're working on. And so knowing how to make them from scratch and knowing where to find them, how to use them, how to edit them and shape them, very important and very handy. So let's take a look in part one at, I think in part one it's going to be mainly how to build patterns from scratch and how to take advantage of patterns that are built into a lot of VSTs and programs we already have. So that's what we're looking at today. So all digital audio workstations come with all kinds of tools to help you write MIDI notes in a kind of a pattern or musical ways. So let's take a look at some of the tools that come with Cubase and see if we can get something going here. You can grab your draw tool and you could go kind of old school where you draw in musical ideas, kind of a quick little patterns like so. So, you know, just any kind of quick little pattern, you can draw them in. We all know about that. But there are other ways that also let us work quicker. So if we switch from drawing in by hand and switch to like the line tool, depending on what your DAW is set up with or your grid spacing, right now mine's set up to 1/8 notes. So let's just, with our line tool selected, if we draw out a line straight across, we should get all 1/8 notes now because that's what our grid is set up to. So a really handy way to draw notes in a straight line or up in an arc going upwards. So you get some cool ideas really quick that way, but there's even better ways to come up with some notes. So let's get rid of those, go back, and let's check out the Parabola tool. So if we click on the line tool and kind of hold on there, then we can switch to a parabola. And instead of a straight line, now we can click in an area and we can hold it and drag it across the grid and let go. And now it'll give us a nice arcing kind of curve. And that can be very handy because, you know, with just a little bit of tweaking, I should just do this the quick way. And let's go back here, select them all. And if we just give it a little bit of going from nothing to a little bit more louder with the velocity switching using that tool, the velocity tools down here, we can quickly get something a little interesting going. But there's even better ways to write some MIDI notes. Let's get rid of that, go back to the beginning, and we can switch. If we hold again, we get the option to go to the sign tool. Now, sign tool is really cool because let's just drag this out a little bit bigger here. Something like about there. And we're at 1/8 notes. That should be good. Now, the sign tool, if you just, you know, plot somewhere on your grid, hold and drag, you'll see you get this, and you're thinking, well, that's not very useful. But you can see that even doing that will give you a straight line. But let's try something a little more interesting. What if we click down and we drag a little bit, but then we hold down the Shift key? That gives us a way bigger, or not such a busy sine wave. Now let's let go. And now we have a very interesting little quarter note. And this could be the start, depending on, how you're going to edit this. But, you can see how this could be the start of something interesting. So using the sine tool can be very handy. And let's just try a few other different things you can do with it here. So again, if you go to the sine tool, click on it, and you can hold down and drag, and that will give you a big something, you can drag it out like this. But the key to this, and the little secret, is if you hold down the shift key, before you drag all the way out, that's when you can spread it out. You can spread out the coil. When I hold down the shift key, I'm spreading out the coil. When I let go of the shift key, it just coils really thickly there. So the secret to getting what you want is clicking, dragging, and then deciding when you're going to hold down the shift key like I just did there, and then dragging it out. And that allows you to get some very interesting notes. But we should have this to at least 16ths or 32s to give us even a more interesting. So let's go back. And you have to have enough notes to be able to see clearly your design that you're creating. Well, let's try this again. Parabola Tool. Click down, drag, maybe continue to drag out to get some interesting waves. You'll get the hang of it. And now that we have enough resolution in our notes, we get a very interesting curve. Now that in itself isn't very musical, but I imagine if you just played it right, let's say you change the grid to 16th, no, let's say 8th notes again. And let's go back here. That was a mistake. Let's delete it like that. Go back to the beginning. And now we have it set it to 8th notes, but here's another interesting trick. Normally your grid, you have half notes, quarter notes, 8th notes, 16th, 32s, and you're somewhat limited there. You could go to triplets, but even that's limiting because it's, you get to pick your triplets or dotted. But have you ever wondered if there's a lot more options, a lot more fancy stuff you could do? Well, you can. You could go to 1/8, so that's just 8th notes. But if you go to the editor section here and switch to Tuplet, so Tuplet's the key for changing your grid to very interesting grid patterns so that you can draw more interesting musical patterns. So now that Tuplet is here, I can switch it from off. I can click this little button to 2. Now watch the grid when I change the Tuplets. So it's going to divide the grid to more interesting musical lengths, timing. So you could, you could use quarter note tuplets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could use 8th note tuplets, 16th note tuplets. So you have so many more grid size ideas using tuplets here. So even with 8th note tuplet, I'm going to get a more interesting grid to work on now. So now if I go back to the Parabola Tool, hold down, and then use the Shift key, and then drag something out, now I should get something quite interesting. Now look at that. Let's just zoom out. Now this could be an interesting pattern. This almost looks like a professional pattern that you might find in a VST like the Orchestra or something, one of their arpeggios or something. That's a little bit too low. Let's bring these up. We're not even really concerned with what notes we're dealing with, just the patterns right now. But you can see what a nice pattern it was created so quickly. And this is just one of thousands of patterns you could come up with one click of that parabola button once you have tuplets set up and your grid spacing set up. And so from here you could really you can use all your other tools to get even fancier and, you know, try out endless new ideas. And then why not maybe, let's see, how about if we mix up ideas and go back to the line tool? So we go back to line tool, go back to the beginning, and maybe we go back to just eighth notes, regular eighth notes, and we draw out a line right across here. Now we have a different timing notes. So these are tuplet notes here, down here, that we created with the sign, but now these are regular eighth notes up here. And again, that's, the notes are, you know, it's a little bit difficult coming up with, you know, really great musical things that make sense. But if you, the great thing is now I'm going to say switch the key to maybe like just D major, right? And since as normal I've got it set up to chord track, maybe we can get this to sound a little bit more musical. So let's just quickly do this and that. And we could select this a lot easier if it was on a separate track. You could select every second note, as I've mentioned, by using something like the Midi. I've got it set up on a hotkey, but the logical editor under the Midi, go to the logical editor. You can set that up on a hotkey. And what it allows you is, instead of going in and having to select every second note, you can simply, you know, use the logical editor to, in this case, every second note. I've made one here, or it was here, I think I made it, but you can shift it here, double click, and change it to a second note, third note, every fifth note, every sixth note, whatever you need, and save it as a preset in the logical editor. So not only can you create notes really quick, but you can pick them really quick. You can select them really quick. So now with the hotkey, I select the logical editor, go back, select every second note, and you have to hit apply. And now I've got a very interesting note selection. And I could get rid of these, or select all of those, you know, holding down the shift button, or you can get rid of those and just keep these selected, and then using your arrow buttons, move these up. And so you're working really quickly with the logical editor and how you're picking the notes. And you're working really quickly with the line tool, Parabola Tool, and a lot more tools to quickly go through, make them, and edit them. That still sounds like crap, but you can see the interesting patterns that you can do with these tools. And I've got many examples that I've been working on today, a lot of kind of more musical, you know, better ideas here. But as far as using the tools, that's as simple as that. The Parabola Tool is just excellent for all kinds of interesting patterns to be made really quickly. And then to be able to select the tools using the Midi editor there, logical editor, to select them how you like them and move them around. So in the next section, we're going to look at a couple more tools that are very interesting. All right, another really great tool is your step time input. So instead of inputting notes with tools on the grid or playing them live on a keyboard, you can activate this button, which is your step input button here. And once you do so, now when I go to my keyboard, it will input whatever I have set up. So right now it's eighth notes, so we'll keep it at eighth notes. And wherever your line is here starting from, it's going to create notes. So let's just get to the middle of the keyboard here. And as I input notes, and for some reason this button goes off, you have to make sure it's on, so make sure that's highlighted. But now when I input notes on my keyboard, I can do it as slow as I want. I can go, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. And you can see how you can create patterns in that regard. So you can still use your hands on the keyboard, but you're not you know, constrained to having to move with the tempo of your DAW. So let's just grab these and try it again. Delete that. Now the blue line always has to be shifted back to start. That's where you have to click here to take this blue line from here to shift it back over here. And now I can try to come up with something musical. So I could go. So that's just a little pattern. Let's So very easy to put in patterns using your fingers on your keyboard in step time. It's actually a really great way to come up with some quick patterns. Again, move the blue line, so set your cursor back to the beginning, then double click on your cursor and that pops the blue line behind the cursor here. So even if you just create a pattern going I goofed up there, but yeah, if we delete this last note, and sometimes my keyboard's an old keyboard, so it sticks a little bit. I've noticed that. Time to get a new one, I think. But so you could do it that way, and then you could maybe, you could take your line tool and switch to quarter notes for your bass, and just quickly put down something for your bass down here. And before you know it, you got something going on. And if you select them and keep them in the scale and the key, and move this into the, keep everything in the scale for right now. And go back to the beginning, turn off step. Very crude little thing going there, but you could possibly, do something like just, it's all about the creativity at this point. And there's literally, you can imagine all the different musical ideas you can get by just doing simple little patterns. So a very crude little pattern here, but you really get the idea what you can do with your own tools here and not have to necessarily rely on arpeggiations from other instruments, but or you can, as I'm going to show in the next segment, how you can take musical ideas from the orchestra, scalar, sonokinetics, drag and drop, anything really. What's that one that's got UJam, all their products have, pretty much everything has drag and drop now. But you can take an idea from a drag and drop VST, drag it in, and then customize it using all these tools I'm showing you here. But in the next segment, we're going to look at one other item that you can find in Cubase to help you out. All right, so if you go to a track, any instrument track, MIDI track, and if you go to Midi Inserts, click that open, click the next bar open, and go to Arpeggi SX. So it's their kind of ARP creator inside of Cubase. It comes with Cubase, and it has the classic and the sequence mode. And you can come up with, you could spend a few hours in here coming up with a bunch of different musical ideas, and then you can save them out with the save buttons. And I've come up with a whole bunch. I spent a couple hours in there just seeing what it can do, and you can get some really great different sequences in here. And literally, you can just click one, but you do have to have, so, on your MIDI piece here, quickly just go to the editor and turn off quantize right now. We could go to maybe eighth notes, and if we go to chord editing, just quickly put in C3, maybe put in just a C chord and maybe a C sharp or a D. Oops. All right, so now we have two chords in here. So as long as the Apache has something to deal with, it now will play. So if I put this on looping, so that's now the Apache that is set up with, there's hundreds of different things in here. You literally can come up with all kinds of styles, and I'll show you a few more that I created today. But once you have that done, so go back to the start, all you have to do is put in some chords that you want to play your sequence with. And once you have those chords in that will play it, just go up to MIDI up here, and merge MIDI in loop is what you want. Merge MIDI in loop. Click that and just say include inserts. This is an insert, so our Apache SX is an insert, so click that on and it will merge it. And now right over this you'll see on top of it is that sequence all written out in, so if I delete my chords now and then drag out the sequence that was just created, we can see now we can turn this off. We don't even need that on. You should turn it off. And we have our sequence. And because there's hundreds of different ideas you could come up with here, you could easily use these tools to add a lot of movement and interest in your tracks just using this tool alone. And then you can get into editing it with all kinds of fancy stuff. So wanted to mention that. All right, so here I have 3 of those different sequences created in Apache. And let's see what they sound like using the emotional violin just set to a short spiccato with a marcato short articulation. And if we listen to them, so we notice that it's an interesting patterns we have, but they can be improved a lot by, first of all, you'll notice that all of our velocities are all the same, and you should never do that, especially with strings, because just like a string player isn't a machine, it's not a droid playing, so every time the string player bows, the bow hits the strings, it'll be at a different velocity. And sometimes highly different velocity as the passion, and they're playing with faster and faster. So we want to replicate that. So definitely take parts of your patterns, select them, and then wherever you got your velocity controls, start to mess around with where the apexes of how the sound's going to build, but definitely put some variables in there. And just to give you a quick idea of just, varying certain things, maybe turning up the bass a little bit, and just, adding a little bit of differences in those velocities. And if we're to select these and ramp these up, and maybe take this one and put that a little bit up and build it up a little bit. And maybe we'll grab these. I'm just working quick here to give you ideas how you can quickly shift the velocities up and down and give some ideas to your patterns here. But definitely spend time with your velocities and move them around. And you'll notice that there'll be a nice change in dynamics now. So, and that the bass notes are a little too strong. Let's back them off a little bit. And you can so you can hear there's a difference now as the velocities are kicking in some of the velocity layers that are in a lot of these VSTs. Really take advantage. They've spent all the money and time recording from very light to very harsh strokes and recordings for every one of the notes here, with all their velocities. So that's what you're doing down here with your velocity sliders. You're taking advantage of all those different recordings and how they played the instrument and recorded them. So use the velocity layers by using your velocity sliders. And next part of the video, we'll look at another VST and how it uses and deals with musical patterns. So here we have Sonokinetics Maximo Strings, and if we listen to the same two chords here, and I've moved them in a position where the Sonokinetic library can understand them in the blue zone here, so I shifted down the chords a couple octaves. And if we listen to it, it will sound very nice, even though two simple chords. So here we have some nice musical string ideas going on here, and they're all captured inside Sonokinetics products. I think they're almost all MIDI draggable now, almost all of them. So what we can do is we can say, okay, so let's just capture the idea. Let's turn off the low strings, the medium strings, and just leave the high strings and listen to that. Let's turn it up a little bit. So there we have a musical pattern, a nice little, strings playing, a little string idea there. And so if we go to this button here, we've got to the page where we can drag this out. So this is the full recording that they have, and you can drag it out in whatever key that you want it to be in. So in this case, we'll just leave it at C major. And once you select what key it's in, you can just, up here, you can drag it out to your DAW, so we can have it play now with the orchestra and see how that sounds. So if we, let's see, turn off Maximo and play this, drag this out a little bit. And move this in. Now we have the orchestra with just the full staccato strings. So that's with no animators going, no arpeggiations helping it out. So it's just the strings. So if we look on it here, it's just a color with the full staccato playing, but it still sounds good. And we have a musical idea. And what we have here is just the notes that were used for that string idea, but we can use it as a starting point. And if we're using, the orchestra with it, we could just as easily just go to a rhythm and add a little bit of rhythmic beat to that and see how that sounds. And since there was a chord change, let's do the chord change. Go back. Turn it down a little. And then from here, we can, do all kinds of some interesting things. We may just quickly drag some of these notes around and just edit a little bit. And we may take those notes and put them on, we'll start them light and ramp them up a little bit. And just, start. But you can see how quickly now we changed this musical idea. We came from just straight rhythm notes. We changed it, we moved it a chord or one step up, one note up, and then we've grabbed some of the notes and we've ramped up how that builds up. And, we have a new musical idea to work with. So, that's what this video is about, just showing you all the tools and the ways you can, endless ways that you can work with all kinds of inspiration. And so quickly then you could, shift to a different eighth note pattern with the orchestra. So right here, it's just the beginning of a new musical idea. So that's how you can use Sonokinetics products. They have all kinds of, this is just one of, many different musical ideas inside the Sonokinetic products. They have, altogether there's just hundreds of great riffs and phrases and ostinatos, and which can be, dragged into your DAW and then manipulated and assigned to any instrument you want, because it's all MIDI. There's really no limit at this point, you know. And so in the next segment, we're going to look at some more of the sonokinetic little riffs I came up with, and then we're going to talk about the orchestra. So here's some more of the Maximo, and if we just turn it on, you'll see the patterns here. A little busy up here, but immediately I'm getting the idea that maybe I just go to the line tool. I've got quarter notes set up, and if I start, let's see, on C2 to get some bass to kind of, with all that busy string work up there, if I just give some boldness with the quarter note bass line, and if we go back and play it from here. So just an interesting idea there, and but you can see how fun it is to try out all kinds of different ideas. So now let's delete these two for now. Go back to the beginning and pull up some of the Orchestra 2. So the Orchestra 2, in the same way here, what I did was just created you know, some chords, and then once you play those chords, it gives you then the option, after it's been recorded, you just drag it out. So same type of thing as Apache. And got some of these rhythms going. So these weren't meant to play together. I should split that up and loop them separately, but just so quick to get all kinds of rhythmic ideas. So go back. Now that's just your basic rhythm again, but you know, as I've said, you can imagine how easy it would be to manipulate this into some interesting, either, you know, bringing in some ways that it changes chords, or it ramps up, and changing the velocity notes. And here's that other one again. And in fact, I think that's what I did for this one. I basically started out with this rhythmic idea and just went and did something like that. And you can see how much more interesting it is. Yeah, that's what I did on this one. I've got a lot more of these custom ones that I did, but that's what I did. I started with this basic orchestra, and I think it was strings, rhythm, something like eighths or something simple, and then going from this to just changing things around, you know, quickly coming up with ideas. And basically that's what I did with my spare time today. I've come up with all these different musical ideas. Some of them good, some not so good, but it's a lot of fun to do, and you will come up with some really good ones. And so then the good ones, if we just get rid of that for now, or the ones that you want to keep and possibly turn into some other musical ideas. So let's just listen to a bunch of, using the orchestra. So I'll set the orchestra to full staccato notes, no rhythm. So all the rhythm's going to come from the MIDI notes. Let's just zoom. All right, so here we have some of the custom ideas I came up with today. Usually just started from some simple rhythmic idea, and just vary the velocities of the strings. And then get into something, a little variation of that. So a little bit higher strings, with a little interesting movement up there in the higher string. And when that repeats enough times, that gives the listener something interesting happening over here. And so when, with your rhythmic patterns, you don't want to keep them just repeating with no interest for the listener, something going on. So often patterns, you have to be sure not to overdo it with a repeating pattern. And that's why changing the velocities keeps the interest. With the velocity changing, you hear different recordings of the playback on the strings. And then if you add a little movement, just something interesting for the ear to pick up on. And then another variation or another different simple idea. The velocities are very nice, and it's kind of emphasizing certain beats. And then go with another idea. So now the listener is engaged with several different things going on, but it's not too busy so that the listener's overwhelmed and can listen to other parts of the song. But so as the notes are going up and down, the bottom rhythms are pretty much steady, just changing one chord change there. So the listener isn't overwhelmed, but it's still interesting enough to be something useful. Let's go check out this one. Another variation, adding some bass. Getting a little bit more complex. And another idea on the same type of theme. A little bit different. The pattern's just changed up. And a little bit of spice there just as the transition to a different chord. Just something so that your ear picks up on that change there. Oftentimes just one little note, moving it in the right place at a transition, will be an interesting move. All right, so here's some ideas taken from the orchestra, complete. The first one is the basic rhythm. That then, gonna move this a little bit down here, drag this up. And then I morphed it into two other ideas. So that idea then gets morphed into something a little more elaborate. Little bridge type section there. So that idea, and then a different idea, just constantly trying different looks at musical ideas. Transition there. No, like bridge section. A little transition note there kind of acted nice there. So that's from the orchestra complete, some ideas from there. So here's another idea. I'm not sure where it started with. Got a basic idea from somewhere. This kind of rhythm, kind of ominous. I worked on it for a while and got something a little more elaborate. Kind of builds with some higher notes just as accents. Here's another idea, the basic idea to start with. That's the idea that got some ideas flowing, and then moved on to some subtle changes. Little interest up there. morphed into something with a little more of an ending, kind of moving on to the next part, kind of. Different musical idea, kind of a flourish. And take a little bit of a different look at it. And on to the next idea. You could take this idea many different ways. Turn this up a little bit. That idea then can morph into something like this. So it's so easy to take one idea and just expand on it in hundreds of different ways to add interest and movement. So we shall look at some more. Not sure if I showed these, the ones from the Apache before, but I'll show it again in case I didn't. Just another simple idea that can be taken all kinds of different ways. And this one was one that I demoed, I think. Let's just get it onto that one there and start from the beginning. And one thing I forgot to show was, and you can see how I moved up the velocities here, a little bit of a crescendo type effect on the velocities. But one thing I was going to show, if you ever need to reverse, oftentimes you'll make a pattern and you wish that you could just reverse it, and there is an easy way to reverse. So under MIDI you'll find all kinds of functions and helpers here, and one of them is mirror and reverse. So you can easily reverse your pattern like that. Just wanted to mention that. Now, one more idea from Apache. All right, and let's just get rid of those and let's move on to some of the scalar ideas. And scalar is just jam-packed with musical patterns, arps, and all kinds of different time signatures and everything. So these are from scalar. So let's just lock onto that and play it from the beginning. So that's just changing a couple chords inside scalar, and then it's so simple to work with. You just come up with some chords, drag them down here, and you can either MIDI capture as they play the chords or just simply drag. So you lasso the chords like that and literally just drag them into your DAW to play it by the Orchestra Complete 2 or whatever. So really so simple to use. But these are straight up just scalar ideas. Just like I say, jam-packed with ideas in here. And you can just imagine how easy it would be to change the chords. And maybe when I'm thinking of doing a complete project where I'll do, like, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 bars of music, and with some chorus and verses. And one thing I want to check out is how you can change, you create your chord progression in one key, and then you can modulate that progression in the verse into a different key. So maybe I'll do a project where we, have chorus, verses, and bridges all done in scalar. But you can imagine how simple that would be to come up with the chorus and the verses, the bridges. So many great ideas in there. And again, they're coming up with a new update 2.4, which should be released on the 26th of May. So thanks for watching part 1 of creating patterns and ostinatos, and today was more of like a pattern day and the tools that you can use to create patterns and ideas. I'm thinking of making a series of these, so you might be seeing part 2 or 3 coming up. But yeah, all these ideas were just, I just came up with them this afternoon. I was, thinking of the idea of all the different ways you can come up with all these patterns and ideas. So hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.